So setting up your primary grade is probably the most important part of your job. Unfortunately, if you don't get it right out of the gate, it can definitely come back to bite you in the end. Your primary balance is of principal importance. Everything kind of pivots around that. If you get into a grade and your primary balance is off, and I don't mean off as in like, oh, it's slightly not matched, you can recover from something like that. But if you have primary balances across multiple shots that are completely different approaches, you're gonna have a really difficult time trying to wrangle everything into a cohesive look. You need to be able to build one step at a time, starting with the primary balance. Then you think about, okay, now what is my look? What is this ultimately gonna be like? And you can't just jump into that. It's like anything else, a painting. You've got to build layer upon layer upon layer before you get to the final image. It is a process. You have to have patience. I typically tend to use the balls and the wheels in combination with a curve to get my balance going. I'm going to go ahead and use a layer 6. I tend to use a curve, a gentle S curve, kind of stretch this image out a little bit, kind of pull out some highlights, find some exposure, and then bring down some of those shadows. Nothing too deep. If you go too heavy in the front, then you're not going to have a lot of dynamic range. Once you start digging in, you should just be trying to make a really nice picture. This doesn't need to be something overwhelming. It's enough to just start to get that color to pop, to have some of that saturation fill in. Contrast and saturation are directly related. So I'm not going to try to pump a bunch of saturation into the primary balance. I want to leave it as clean as possible. This is where you really kind of lean into what the DP kind of has set up for you. Look at the lighting, look at where the shadows fall. This seems to be the center of attention in this shot. She's talking to everybody. We want to make sure her face is exposed. We want to make sure that she's not down at an exposure level that hides anything. That's the most important part of the scene. And so you kind of lean into that. I might add a little bit of saturation in there, but I want a lot of that work to come from my contrast. So you can see that that's happening right now as I just kind of bring down the mids, bring up the highlights, maybe bring down the shadows. Nothing hiding in the dark. That feels pretty good for a balance. I think that's pretty good. None of the shadows come down. We don't lose anything back here. We don't lose anything under her hair, in the shadows of her face. All the blacks are open. We've got a nice bit of contrast. We're starting to see some of those colors. I'm actually going to bring the mids down just a little bit more there, and then counterbalance that by bringing those highlights up. I wanted a little bit more richness out of my midtones and my shadows. That's nice.